So again, if you've got a camera, turn it on so we can say hi. It's Kyle's birthday today, apparently. So we don't have to sing happy birthday, so that's okay. No cookies or anything. All right, so welcome back. It is Monday, so here comes somebody else popping in here. I will double check the because they. All right, Jose says happy birthday. It's not my, yeah, it's we'll go in gallery view here. So Kyle's birthday. Anybody else's birthdays coming up? Do we have any other birthdays coming up this month? All right. Okay, very good then. We have Halloween coming up, I guess. So, and then I was looking at the calendar. I'll bring that up later. But yeah, you guys should keep an eye on the academic calendar as well, just in case there's stuff popping up. I've got one on my fridge at home just to kind of let us know what important days we've got and any 3-day, if there's any 3-day weekends or anything like that. We have advising coming up as well. So yep, happy birthday in the chat there. So, all right. Very good. So we've got just a quick bit of stuff to talk about with subnetting. There was one thing that was kind of left over that I was kind of gonna, that I think helps make sense out of this for you. So if we're at the board here again, so when you're looking at the subnet mask, if we go back to the Punky's example, because that's what we've been dealing with, remember that they wanted to make 25 subnets. Well, you can't make exactly 25 using standard subnetting techniques. You have to borrow, either 4 bits. Well, that doesn't get you enough because remember you lose 2 subnets. So the formula was, 2 to the nth power minus 2 equals the number of subnets or the number of hosts that are left. So it's still ding in there. So people are still rolling into class here this morning. So remember back to this example, they ended up borrowing 5 bits. Right, so 5 bits. So if we're moving across here, you've got with the class C, you got 8 bits here, 8 bits here, 8 bits here. Now I already changed this last one. So you always have your starting point, whatever your ground zero is. One big network that hasn't been chopped up. This was the class C. So originally this would have been a 0 here, and you've got 8 bits. This last set here. You've got 8 bits to play with, right? So that's one big network. Normally, if you had all 8 bits as the host section, you would have 254 addresses. So you've got this kind of sliding scale where the more networks you create, the more bits you use to create networks, the fewer bits are left over for the host section. And that's, so it's basically a give and take operation. So in the example, remember, we needed to create 32 subnets, so we borrowed 5 bits, and so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now notice too, this is, again, I mentioned this last week, and again, we'll just have a little bit of this today, then we'll move on. But I want to kind of show you this last thing that, again, I think helps me understand how this stuff works. So these numbers are going to be repeating themselves over and over again. Now notice I didn't fill in these over here because most of the time, by the time you borrow that many bits over this way, you don't have any left over for the host section. So 248's about as far over as you're going to end up doing that, but you could have one more over there. So at any rate, you can see these numbers. So 128 plus 64 gives you 192. So these two added together, adding another. So you're just adding these up across as you go along. The math is pretty simple. There's nothing hugely difficult about the math. Now, when you get into larger examples that are using class B or class A networks, then you end up with, the 2 to the nth power. This number gets to be quite a bit bigger, and you can use your calculator on it. But moving across here, you can see you've got 128 plus 64 gives you 192. Add another 32, and you get 224. Adding another 216, you get 240. And then adding the 8, so all 5 bits that we borrowed, you get 248, right? So, if you were making yourself a little cheat sheet or something, or just kind of trying to recognize subnet masks that are common numbers, these numbers repeat over and over again. So there's only certain numbers that you're going to get when you have a subnet mask. All right, so if you're looking at the examples here, if we're back to Punky's example, Remember, we borrowed 5 bits, which means you end up with 3 bits left over. So if this is now our dividing point here, you have 3 bits left over for the host section. So 2 to the third. So remember, if you're using that same formula, 2 to the third minus 2. So 2 to the third is 8, right? So you actually get 6 usable subnets. But we're gonna put all 8 into the little chart, and then you can see where we're at. So if you have, we know we're going to have eight subnets. You're losing the top and the bottom subnet, but we know we're going to have 8 there. So how do they get those numbers? Well, you know, basically you've got 3 bits, and this is one that if you're looking at it, you can kind of do this in your head as well. And you think about it, how binary works. If I've got 3 bits and our only 2 choices are zeros and ones, right? We've only got a 0 or a 1 to choose from. You've got from 0, 0, 0 up to 1, 1, 1, and then everything in between. And you're thinking, okay, in your head, how many combinations can I come up with? You know, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, right? There's only so many possible combinations you can come up with. So let's list those out. So if we wanted to come up with just the number 1 in binary, we would have 0, 0, 1, right? 0, 0, 1. 2 in binary would be 0. We don't have 4s. You have a 2 dropping through. So if you're thinking about these as like a drop down menu, however you want to think about it. So 2 would be 0, 1, 0, right? 3 would be 0, 1, 1, because you got 2 plus 1. So again, when you only have 3 bits to work with, you can kind of do this in your head if you're trying to think about every possible iteration of these. So we just did 3. 4 would be, that's an easy one, 1, 0, 0. 5 would be 4 plus 1 over here, so you'd have 1, 0, 1. Right? 6, 1, 1, 0. 7, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right? All ones, right? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's all of them. That's all possible iterations that we'd have with only 3 bits left over for our host section. Now remember, you're going to lose the top address, the top subnet, or the top address there, and you're going to lose the bottom one because all zeros represents a network address, and all ones represents a broadcast address, right? So these are the subnets that you're going to get for each, you know, the ones that you have left over for your host sections, right? So you've only got 3 bits. You've only got 3 bits left over. And in his example, he makes that clear that, you know, you've used up a lot of your bits that you had available creating these subnets. So you have 32 subnets minus 2, so you end up with 30 subnets, and then you'd have these addresses available in each subnet. So you'd have blocks of numbers, and not very many of them, so not very many addresses in each subnet, but that's kind of how it goes if you were doing this. Now remember, in the real world, if you were creating subnets behind a firewall, you wouldn't probably be using the class C addressing, right? You would use an address range that has greater flexibility. So in a larger network, you would probably see the 10 dot addresses. Remember, 192 are private. What are our other private private address ranges? You've got a class B one too, right? So you've got 192, 172, and then 10 dot addressing. And this 10 dot addressing is used a lot in big networks, right? Because behind the firewall, it gives you tons of class A network addresses behind the firewall. They are private, so you can't use a 10 dot address on a public facing router interface or something like that. But hopefully that helps a little. So for me, that helps when I see, okay, I've got 3 bits left over. So if I share this screen here, if I've got 3 bits left over, right, we borrowed 5 right here on this part of his example. We borrowed 5 to create the subnets. That only gives us 3 left over. And he mentions that too. He's like, well, you know, you're the one that wanted to make all these subnets out of a class C address. It would make more sense to divide it up into maybe 4 or 8 subnetworks. or simply to use a different addressing structure entirely and not use 192 addresses on your router. For home routers, the little ones like at home, 192 is pretty much a standard, and most home networks are not subnetted, right? You have one chunk of addresses. So if you guys look at your addressing on your home networks, you're going to see you've got a 255.255.255.0. So you've got a class C network and it is not subnetted. So that means you can have 254 addresses on your home networks. They're not going to be chopped up into smaller pieces or anything like that. So he walks through this example and kind of shows you the intervals. So he says, we're going to be creating these subnets. He's showing you the initial address, right? Even though you're losing those top and the bottom subnets. And that has to do with, again, the fact that one's a network address and one's a broadcast address for that. So his next example is a class A network address, right? So the numbers get quite a bit bigger at that point. So if you're using that formula 2 to the nth power, for these, I would use a calculator, right? So if he's got 2 to the 20th, obviously, busting out a calculator is going to be very handy for that. So you don't have to worry about. The reason we start with a class C example like we did is simply that it's easier for us to get our heads around the math that's involved. You can use a little cheat sheet up there and you can say, okay, yeah, you've only got 8 bits to worry about. It fits within our cheat sheet. As you start expanding into the next subnet, so class B or even class A, the numbers just get bigger, but the process is the same. So in terms of trying to figure stuff out, but I wanted to show you guys again, the idea is that, if you're working through these little problems, you're kind of getting a handle on, okay, yeah, we've got this kind of sliding scale idea. You've only got certain numbers that can work for subnet addresses. The important thing, again, is determining, is this class A, B, or C? So this one happens to be class C, right? You know what your starting point is. So you've got your starting point is here. And then you have to figure out where you want to get to, how many subnets you want to create, or you're working backwards the other direction. If you are already at a job site and they have already created subnets, then you can figure out what the subnet ranges are. We did that the other day with the subnet calculator for my IP address here in the classroom. And we discovered, okay, yeah, so they've got, they created, over 1,000 subnets, and each one had about 127 addresses per subnet. So if you use a subnet calculator, and there are tons of them out there, at least if you're using a subnet calculator, you're going to be able to have a background to understand a little bit more about how you got there, right? So it's the same thing if you're punching in numbers and doing long division. Nobody likes to do long division, right? That's one of the things, you use a calculator for it, but you do understand the concept. You understand how you get those numbers and what they mean. Kind of like the subnetting idea is that, hey, at least you kind of have an understanding of where these numbers are coming from. You've only got 3 bits. If you had 4 bits, then you'd have, a few more choices, right? You'd have, one, all the way from 0, 0, 0, 4 zeros there. So you'd end up with 2 to the 4th, right? You'd have 16 choices there, and you'd lose 2. So you can see as you get more bits for the host section, obviously you can have more computers in each subnet, and you're just going to have fewer subnets. So there's definitely a trade-off that's going on behind the firewall. So this thing's been dinging a little bit. I'm just going to double check to make sure I got. So I see Anthony Leon joined us. Let's see, Taylor Jackson, is he here? Nope. Greg Ashbaugh. Let's see, Finley Lenson.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, cool. I was just trying to see the Brandon Nicholas. Yep, he's here. All right. So yeah, I'm taking roll today. I don't take roll every day, but if I take roll, I want to make sure I give everybody credit for being here. And Alexis Gallegos, is he here? See him on the. All right, I think that's everybody. All righty. So there's this goofy movie that I typically show in class, and it's a little older, but it's hard to find. It's hard to find good movies about how networks kind of work. This one's made by, I believe, Ericsson cell phone or whatever. So it's showing now the way networks work hasn't fundamentally changed much. I mean, basically, you've got signaling that's happening on cables. It can be fiber optic. Did you know they actually have cables that run completely across the ocean? When I was amazed to find that out, years ago. I was like watching the show on how they are laying these giant fiber optic cables completely across the ocean. It's actually pretty amazing that they've done that. Now we've also got satellite communications happening as well. I saw Starlink is going to try to start having offering satellite internet to airlines. So they'll have, and they've had internet already, but it's very slow. So that should be a little bit faster. But okay, so we're going to watch this quick little show. Keep in mind this one. So the movie's been around for quite a while. Their terminology is for some devices is a little bit different because it's European, but they'll call something like a router switch, and we might just simply call it like a router. But so as you're watching this, there's a few terminology things that are going to be slightly different, but I think definitely get the idea. So things like switches, routers. There's a firewall, obviously, that they're talking about, and then the other thing that they'll be talking about is ports. So one of the next things we'd be looking at is if you have a specific IP address. So let's pick one that we've got. So we've got, let's say 192.168.100.3. So that's a specific IP address. It's not a network address. So if that's our IP address and we want to designate a specific port, the nomenclature for that is to have a colon here, the two dots, colon, and then maybe port 25. So if you wanted to designate a specific port, that's how you do it. So you have your IP address, a colon, and then the specific port number for whatever service you would have running. So port 25, as you'll see in the movie, is for email. Port 80 is one that you guys also should be familiar with. Port 80 is for normal web traffic, like a normal website. And then port 443 is for websites that use the HTTPS prefix, so a secure hypertext transfer. So if you've got a secure website, and a lot of websites say HTTPS these days. One thing you'll notice on Punky's website, if you're looking at Punky's website up at the top, it says not secure because he hasn't bothered to get a certificate. The way you make a website secure is you actually have to apply for a certificate service, and then you can have the HTTPS prefix. So if I was sharing this screen again here, and like you guys care too much, but you'll notice up at the top it says not secure. It says your connection to this site is not secure. You should not enter any sensitive information, blah, blah, blah. Well, and we're not, right? This website doesn't include any options to put in data or anything like that. So you can look at the site settings. But again, it just means that that particular website does not have an HTTPS prefix, whereas most websites these days do if it's any type of commercial website. But his is basically just like a personal website of his own stuff, which I thought it was kind of funny. If we take this out and go back to his main website, it's just really, it looks like a website from like, the 90s or something, which I think is kind of fun. But at any rate, it's been updated a little bit. So, okay. So anyway, we're back to our share here. Let's see, share this and we'll get some sound going for you guys. Okay, so this is the official, not official. Where is our video panel? All right, so this is called Warriors of the Net. It's been around for a while. Bear with me. It's kind of fun to watch. They're showing packets, and the packets look like these goofy toasters. So if you're trying to visualize this, but if you're getting a handle on some of the terminology, so think, what happens when you're actually using the web. It's tough to find movies that show how networks actually work. So let's check it out.
For the first time in history, people and machinery are working together, realizing a dream. A uniting force that knows no geographical boundaries without regard to race, creed, or color. A new era where communication truly brings people together. This is the dawn of the net. Want to know how it works? Click here to begin your journey into the net. Now, exactly what happened when you clicked on that link? You started a flow of information. This information travels down into your own personal mailroom, where Mr. IP packages it, labels it, and sends it on its way. Each packet is limited in its size. The mailroom must decide how to divide the information and how to package it. Now, the package needs a label containing important information, such as sender's address, receiver's address, and the type of packet it is. Because this particular packet is going out onto the internet, it also gets an address for the proxy server, which has a special function, as we'll see later. The packet is now launched onto your local area network, or LAN. This network is used to connect all the local computers, routers, printers, etc. for information exchange within the physical walls of the building. The LAN is a pretty uncontrolled place, and unfortunately, accidents can happen. The highway of the LAN is packed with all types of information. These are IP packets, Novell packets, Apple Talk packets. They're going against traffic, as usual. The local router reads the address and, if necessary, lifts the packet onto another network. The router, a symbol of control in a seemingly disorganized world.
Whoops, sorry about that. Let's go with this one here, this one here. This one goes here, this one goes here. I don't like this one. Let's go with this one. Let's go here. A little one goes left. Let's go with this one here. Another channel here. Let's put that one here. Another one there. Let's put that one here.
There he is, systematic, uncaring, methodical, conservative, and sometimes not quite up to speed.
Sorry.
But at least he is exact, for the most part.
That one goes there. That one goes there. That one goes there. And this one goes there. Another one goes there. That goes there. He's behind him. Let's go there. That goes there. He goes there. Let's put that one there. As the packets leave the router, they make their way into the corporate intranet and head for the router switch. A bit more efficient than the router switch plays fast and loose with IP packets, deftly routing them along their way. A digital pinball wizard, if you will.
Here we go. Here comes another one. And it's another. Watch this, Mom. Here goes. Whoop, we're on the back. Hey, in there, in there, in there. Over the left, over the right, over the left, over the right. You got it. Here it comes. Right on. He shoots. He scores. It's going. Hey, wait. Hey, watch out. Here comes another one. Oh, here we go. And it's gone. It's Mom.
As packets arrive at their destination, they're picked up by the network interface, ready to be sent to the next level. In this case, the proxy. The proxy is used by many companies as sort of a middleman in order to lessen the load on their internet connection, and for security reasons as well. As you can see, the packets are all of various sizes, depending upon their content. The proxy opens the packet and looks for the web address, or URL. Depending upon whether the address is acceptable, the packet is sent onto the internet. There are, however, some addresses which do not meet with the approval of the proxy, that is to say, corporate or management guidelines.
These are summarily dealt with. We'll have none of that. For those who make it, it's on the road again. Next up, the firewall. The corporate firewall serves two purposes. It prevents some rather nasty things from the internet from coming into the intranet, and it can also prevent sensitive corporate information from being sent out onto the internet. Once through the firewall, a router picks up the packet and places it onto a much narrower road, or bandwidth, as we say. Obviously, the road is not broad enough to take them all. Now you might wonder what happens to all those packets which don't make it along the way. Well, when Mr. IP doesn't receive an acknowledgement that a packet has been received in due time, he simply sends a replacement packet. We are now ready to enter the world of the Internet. A spider web of interconnected networks which span our entire globe. Here, routers and switches establish links between networks. Now, the net is an entirely different environment than you'll find within the protected walls of your LAN. Out here, it's the Wild West. Plenty of space, plenty of opportunities, plenty of things to explore and places to go. Thanks to very little control and regulation, new ideas find fertile soil to push the envelope of their possibilities. But because of this freedom, certain dangers also lurk. You'll never know when you'll meet the dreaded ping of death. A special version of a normal request ping, which some idiot thought up to mess up unsuspecting hosts. The paths our packets take may be via satellite, telephone lines, wireless, or even transoceanic cable. They don't always take the fastest or shortest routes possible, but they will get there. Eventually. Maybe that's why it's sometimes called the worldwide wait. But when everything is working smoothly, you can circumvent the globe 5 times over at the drop of a hat. Literally. And all for the cost of a local call or less. Near the end of our destination, we'll find another firewall. Depending upon your perspective as a data packet, the firewall could be a bastion of security or a dreaded adversary. It all depends on which side you're on and what your intentions are. The firewall is designed to let in only those packets that meet its criteria. This firewall is operating on ports 80 and 25. All attempts to enter through other ports are closed for business. Port 25 is used for mail packets, while Port 80 is the entrance for packets from the Internet to the web server. Inside the firewall, packets are screened more thoroughly. Some packets make it easily through customs, while others look just a bit dubious. Now, the firewall officer is not easily fooled, such as when this ping of death packet tries to disguise itself as a normal ping packet.
It's okay, Gorm. It's okay. No problem. Have a nice day. Be out of here. Bye.
For those packets lucky enough to make it this far, the journey is almost over. It's just a lineup on the interface to be taken up into the web server. Nowadays, a web server can run on many things, from a mainframe to a webcam to the computer on your desk, or why not your refrigerator? With a proper setup, you can find out if you have the makings for chicken cacciatore or if you have to go shopping. Remember, this is the dawn of the net. Almost anything's possible. One by one, the packets are received, opened, and unpacked.
The information they contain, that is, your request for information, is sent on to the web server application. The packet itself is recycled, ready to be used again, and filled with your requested information. Addressed and sent out on its way back to you. Back past the firewall, routers, and on through to the internet. Back through your corporate firewall. And onto your interface. Ready to supply your web browser with the information you requested. That is, this film. Pleased with their efforts and trusting in a better world, our trusty data packets ride off blissfully into the sunset of another day, knowing fully they have served their masters well. Now, isn't that a happy ending?
Oh yes, the happy little data packets.
That's hilarious.
So, like I said, it's a little older at this point, but it's cartoonish because it's hard to describe. You know, what does a packet? How do you make a movie about packets? I mean, you're either going to make them look like little envelopes, or in this case, they look like toasters. These funny little noses attached to them. But it kind of goes over some of the terminology. You know, if they're talking at the very beginning, you know, they talk about TCP packets versus UDP, addressing. The proxy server part, not all networks use proxies, but a lot of them do. So like in a small network, they typically probably don't have a proxy. In larger networks, they will have a proxy server set up that might also do firewall features, caching of data as well. The video is called Warriors of the Net. Thank you. Yeah, so in the here, whoops, there we go. Share this. Yeah, so it's called Warriors of the Net. It's been around for a while. The ping of death, did anybody catch that in the middle of the movie where it's talking about the ping of death? If you Google that problem has been taken care of, you know, a long time ago. Basically what that would be is that if somebody was trying to ping another computer or a device, they would send a ping packet that was malformed and would cause problems. And remember that pinging something, you know, it's built right into the protocol. There's a trick question I sometimes ask, you know, because we're in the movie, it was talking about ports, right? So you had firewalls at both ends, and they were just doing a simple web request, you know, a straight port 80 request. So that can go out through the firewall. So I put it in chat too, but one thing to remember about firewalls and things like that is that they can have inbound and outbound port rules. And so what that means is that, so for instance, like on my desktop here at the school, you know, I'm getting traffic from websites in the outside world, right? So port 80 is open for me to make requests, and then it allows traffic to come back through the firewall on port 80. But the opposite is not true. Somebody else could not get information from me outbound through port 80. Does that make sense? So there's inbound and outbound rules. You can think of them kind of like one-way valves. So that's also an important concept, is that firewalls aren't simply just open or closed. You can have a firewall that's open to send information out the firewall, but not allow information in, or vice versa. If our firewall was opened, I would actually be able to run a website right from this computer, because I have a public address that's assigned to my computer, which again is kind of unusual to have a public address, but it's definitely, you know, if they allowed all the firewalls to be open, we could be like, sure, yeah, you can be running a website, all that good stuff. All right, so just making sure it says we got 17 people, so almost everybody. We're just missing a couple people. Okay, so so again, that was kind of our brief rundown with with packets and information and stuff like that. If you Google ping of death, there's actually a little interesting story about the ping of death routine and all that stuff that you come up with. Did you guys have any other questions about the movie? Anything that popped up that you thought was funny, or questions about it or anything like that?
The ideology of this will bring everyone together, and then you fast forward 20 years and it's we can talk about many issues.
Yeah, no, for sure. You know, I think that is kind of funny too. So the movie is from like 2011. So yeah, it's getting older.
Well, it's not that old, but still.
I'm trying to think. I thought it was older than that, actually. That's how old this video is on YouTube. But the actual
it was uploaded in 2011. Okay.
Yeah, so the actual movie I think is actually even older than that. This particular upload, and it's on YouTube several times. So at any rate, I think it's got the at the very end of the movie, I think it's got how old it is. Let's see if now I'm curious, because yeah, you saw the browser is like, you know, sex.com. Don't type that in. So that's when it's talking about the proxy server. And so a proxy server, that brings that up, is that a proxy server will go out and request data from the internet for you and then bring it back. And if a lot of people are going to the same website, it caches data as well. So the old term for Microsoft's proxy was Internet Server Accelerator. Now I put it in chat. Now it's called Forefront Gateway Threat Management. So they're combining VPN stuff with firewall services, and then also the idea of caching data. So if a whole bunch of people were, you know, going to the same website, it's not going out and getting that data over and over again. It'll cache data for a certain period of time, and then, you know, send that back through on the inside of the firewall to any computer that's asking for that information. But as somebody just mentioned, you know, in the movie, they have like certain addresses flagged, right? So that's another possibility, is that proxy servers can be used for censoring the data a little bit. So like you can block stuff out and blacklist certain IP addresses, maybe certain keywords and stuff like that. It gets a little bit problematic, you know, trying to censor network traffic. The other device that's out there right now that's kind of cool is called a packet shaper. Packet shapers are another device, and what they do is they will take and analyze data traffic, and they will allow some packets to have faster network throughput, and then they'll have some packets that are slowed down, so that you're actually optimizing your network for certain types of traffic. So a packet shaper can actually look at packets and perform, you know, basically, again, it's kind of allowing certain data to go faster. And so for instance, you could use packet shapers to allow Netflix traffic to have a higher priority. For instance, maybe if you were an internet service provider and your customers were all wanting Netflix to work better, you could allow that to have faster traffic. Okay,
does that kind of intertwine with like the quality of signal or whatever that routers do, or is that kind of different?
Quality of service traffic, yeah. QoS, yeah. So on your home routers, you can have QoS traffic as well for like gaming and things like that. So certain addresses and certain types of traffic you can prioritize, and you can also prioritize based on user accounts. So again, on your home routers, I would encourage you guys, in my security class, we've been talking about having, you know, them get the information they need to log. How many of you can log into your home router? How many have that capability? So basically you need your username and password. You don't want to reset your router necessarily, because then you're going to end up calling tech support to be able to get back online. But as he was just asking about the QoS service, so for instance, if you had by device, like maybe your Xbox, you want to prioritize, or your gaming PC, you'd prioritize data traffic for that particular device. So that, you know, if you were on a network and you were sharing it in a household with a bunch of other people, and they were on their tablets and phones and this and that, but you wanted your gaming computer to have priority, you would do quality of service on your home router. And there's some really, you know, even the basic home routers have some pretty cool stuff that they can do. And it's well worth getting in there and poking around with them to improve your you know, skill sets and stuff like that to get in there and check it out. So I looked up the movie. Yeah, the original release date was actually in 2000. So it is actually older than the posting of it on YouTube. So it's been around for a while. The terminology, routers, router switch, firewalls, TCP packets, UDP packets, none of that has really changed. But, you know, definitely the graphics are a little, maybe starting to show their age a little bit, but it's, you know, it's a cartoon anyway. So it's kind of like, okay, well, it definitely is low resolution though. I tried to bump it up to be the highest resolution, and that was it. So it's a little grainy, but Ericsson Cellular, I think, made it. So it had some money behind it at one point to make kind of a cool little cartoon. So it's, yeah, and it's also got a whole website where you can find out more about the movie. So Warriors of the Net, because it's sort of it's a classic at this point. All right. Okay, so I won't bore you too much more with it, but I thought, you know, it's kind of fun, you know, and the idea with addressing of data packets as well. So if you remember in the movie, there's a distinction, and maybe they don't make it clear enough. So in the local area network, they don't come right out and say Ethernet, but yeah, local area network is Ethernet traffic. And then once you make a data request to go out to get IP information, then you've got an IP request that would go out through the firewall. Your initial request is simply to do, maybe it's DNS lookup, and then that's happened. And then you're making a request of a web server somewhere out on the internet, right? So then your data request goes out, and then it comes back with information from the web server back through the firewall to your computer. So anyway, it's kind of fun. All right, so for your reading and stuff like that, you guys will have another quiz coming up. Your first one was just just a few true false questions to kind of get the ball rolling. I saw those scores were mostly pretty good. You had a couple that were not so great, but not terrible. Also, it's only worth 20 points. So if you didn't get as many points as you thought you should have, then you have chances on other assignments to make up more points and stuff like that. Did anybody have any questions about the quiz?
No, it's just a bummer, like that KVM question, the keyboard video mouse, and like the wording was just a little bummer. It just kind of confused me and I got it wrong, but
I think I got that wrong too, sadly.
yeah, it's like, well, it does control multiple things, but then it's like the console, well, then it's, yeah, okay, no.
Yeah, I do remember that one. That question was goofy. Now, the other thing, as I mentioned before, I don't write the questions. And so if there's a question that you guys feel is worded goofy, or, you know, and I can look, you know, if ever, you know, if a whole bunch of people get a question wrong, you know, that's, they can do, they call it item analysis, but whenever you score a test, if you dig into the nitty gritty, you know, sometimes they can do item analysis, and that's supposed to let a teacher know, hey, that was a bad question, right? If everybody gets the question wrong, and I don't write the question, so it doesn't hurt my feelings. If you're like, hey, Dave, that question sucked, you know, what were they talking about? At least you're bringing up some class discussion about it. So I'm all for anything that helps with class discussion, you know, even if it's saying whatever. So I kind of remember that one as well. So, all right. So the other thing that we were looking at is, I don't have my book open yet, but so we're getting into chapter 3. We're dealing with some more network addressing stuff. Again, the movie kind of talks a little bit about like packets, addressing. Port numbers come up, as you mentioned in the movie, with firewalls. And firewalls can do more than just block certain ports, but that's a fundamental thing that a firewall will do, is that it will block or open certain ports. And as I mentioned, that they have inbound and outbound, also called ingress and egress rules to have on firewall. You know, if you're simply talking about blocking ports. So on your home machines, you can actually block ports as well. So on your routers, you can block certain port traffic, and you can also do what's called port forwarding. So the idea with port forwarding, you can see the board there. The idea with a port forwarding is that your computer that's on the back side of the firewall. So let's say we've got messy board syndrome going now. And this is also something that you can play around with is, so let's say you've got your router at home and it's connected to the, connected out to the internet, and it's got its public address there. And it can be wireless or wired, but let's say you've got a wired connection going to a computer and it's been given this private address. Now you have a public address that faces the internet, and you guys can find out your public address just by typing in, what's my IP into a browser. And that's going to go out to a server on the outside world, and then it's going to come back and it's going to try to determine what the address is of your router that faces out to the internet. So you'll have a public address, and it might be 63 dot whatever dot whatever dot whatever, and whatever it happens to be. It's going to be an address that's class A, B, or C, and it's going to be an address that's not a private address. So it's not going to be a 192 or a 172 or a 10 dot address. It has to be one of those addresses that can talk on the internet and be a live address, right? So you can do port forwarding, and that's where you would have, something using your public address. And then when a request comes in for certain traffic, your router is going to forward that traffic to a specific address on the back side of the firewall. So port forwarding allows you to run things like servers. You could have, web services, web server or a game server. So running some type of a service, and services are associated with ports. So a mail server would have certain ports that it needs to have available to be able to talk to other email servers out on the internet. So port 25 is a standard port that's open for mail services. Port 80, as you saw in the video, was for basic web services. And then certain other ports might be for certain game servers, things like that. Your well-known ports are from 1 to 1024. So well-known ports, well-known port numbers. And I'll show you this on the well-known port numbers list. There we go. Okay, so your well-known port numbers are up to 1024. So those are already reserved for certain services. And you can look up just well-known port numbers, and they'll have a list of TCP and UDP ports and what they're actually used for. So this is kind of talked about in your book as well. So when you start getting into IP addressing is required. And then you also need to have a service that uses particular ports. Let me see, there we are. So these are all the well-known port numbers, and you don't have to memorize these, but as you start working with certain services and protocols, then you'll start to see, okay, yeah. So for instance, secure shell or SSH is a very common port number that you might end up open for port forwarding if you wanted to control a piece of equipment using the command line. So telnet is not being used much anymore because it's not secure. So it's been replaced with secure shell. So you can use SSH to connect to a server or a piece of equipment or something like that. But the port forwarding has to be set up. It has to be either opened up to allow traffic or port forwarding set up for that. So telnet is port 23. SMTP is simple mail transport. That's port 25. A lot of these are not, commonly, they're well-known port numbers, but they're not something that's commonly used by anybody pretty much, right? So DNS 53, that's a common one. A bunch of stuff that Xerox had used for authentication stuff. So nothing that's really that useful. Port 80 is normal hypertext transfer protocol. So you can click on that. This is just from Wikipedia. This is just the easy list of port numbers that are used by lots of different services, and then some that are not very common that you really don't. So SNMP, that's also pretty common, simple network management protocol. Has anybody used IRC? Has any of you ever used IRC chat? Okay, it's one of those things that's probably faded out at this point, but that used to be pretty common. All right, so at any rate, 443, there you go. Hypertext, secure hypertext transfer protocol. That's also commonly used. But there's a lot of these on here, and you're not necessarily going to ever need or want to know what they are. But up to 1024, those are the well-known port numbers. And then beyond that are ports that could be used by other services, but they're not regulated to specific numbers. So for instance, if you want to look up like whatever Minecraft server port number. Okay, so the normal port number for Minecraft is 25,565, right? So if you were setting it up and you wanted to do port forwarding, this is a little article on how to forward ports in Minecraft, right? So that might be something you're wondering if somebody was really interested in running their own server, you would want to know what is the port number that needs to be forwarded, set up your router, and then you would configure port forwarding to go from your outside address to a specific address behind the firewall. Oops, oh, we're out of time too. Sorry, guys. All right. We start talking about ports and port numbers, and I get so excited, right? So, all right, anyway, we're ending for today.